Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Life with Zach. Today, I want to talk about a place that I recently went to, Charleston, South Carolina. And after being there twice now, and especially planning a recent trip about 2 months ago with my wife, I wanted to share five things that I learned about Charleston, how to travel there, and how to improve your experience. Now, these are going to be some five general things, so don't expect some specific things like where exactly to go or like the best restaurant to eat at. If we get some comments and feedback related to that, I will might do a different video, but these are basically your five basic things to think about when planning a trip to Charleston. All right, number one, what time should you go? So that's one of the biggest things whenever I make a trip I want to think about is when should I go? When should I go to Charleston? Because you know what? Charleston has some pretty funky weather in terms of the heat. I've been to Charleston in August, and I've been to Charleston at the end of April and in May. And I've talked to people that have been a whole bunch of different times of the year. And I think the decision about when to go depends on what you're going for. All right, so if you're going for the beaches, let's say, you certainly don't want to go in December because you know what? The weather, while not cold compared to, let's say, the Northeast, is not going to be very friendly for going out in the water or going on the beach. However, if you're just going to the city, if you have no desire to go to the beach, if you're trying to just go to the historic sites or whatever like that, December would probably be a pretty good time because it's not going to be as crowded, but also Charleston doesn't get super cold like a lot of other places. So my recommendation on when to go is if you're going to the beach, you can definitely consider going off season because you know what? In the summer, it is super hot and super crowded. So maybe early May, early to mid-May, or late September into October. If you're in the fall, you do have to worry a little bit about maybe like a hurricane or something. But if you're careful, then I think you will have a good time during the off season. But if you go during the summer, just be prepared for crowds and things like that, and a little bit more difficulty getting around, especially getting into some of the beaches and things. We never had an issue getting into the city in the summer. The issue is, though, of course, the heat in South Carolina is never super easy on you, especially if you're trying to walk around and look at things. So definitely, if you're going to the city, go later or really early in the year. If you're going to the beaches, you know, even into April, the weather is pretty good. So you can definitely consider that time. All right, so we talked a little bit about when to go. The next thing is where to go. So Charleston, I really have kind of group the attractions of that area into three different categories. The first is the city itself. Okay, so Charleston is built on a peninsula and is really at the kind of towards the tip of that peninsula. So there you'll find all of the typical Charleston things like Fort Sumter, the historic houses, the Battery, historic churches, all of those things that you think of, Rainbow Row, that you think of when you think of Charleston. And that is kind of the city center, all right? Then you have the beaches. North and south of the city center is a series of barrier islands that have some pretty pristine beaches on them. And the three major ones are Isle of Palms, Sullivan Island, and Folly Beach. Okay. Isle of Palms and Sullivan Islands are kind of north of the city, and Folly Beach is south of the city. All right. So that is your second grouping is the beaches. All right. And the third grouping is what I kind of call your outer attractions. So that's things like historic plantations because plantations are not going to be located in the city center. Plantation owners, people that would have built or been responsible for building those historic plantations that people like to go to, would have had a house in town for when they were in season and then their plantation out of town. So if you want to visit those plantations like Drayton Hall, then those are really kind of on the edge of the whole area. They're more inland, and they're really outside of the city center. But also out there, you have things like the nature preserves. You have hiking, more biking. You have even like up into North Charleston, which is a little bit on the edge of the area. You have things like the Hunley Museum. So there's really those three different groups, and you have to decide what you're really interested in. Like if you're interested in the beaches, there's three major ones to talk about. But if you're more interested in doing nature things, if you like to go hiking and stuff, there's all that. So you just need to be able to check out those three different layers, those three different groupings, and make decisions about where you need to go. All right. So if you're really interested into hitting up historic plantations, you can build a tour around visiting those kind of in those districts that are kind of around the city itself when you're making your planning. But you know what? If you're just only interested in going into the city, then you need to make your planning for that because you're going to want to stay kind of concentrated into that specific area. So again, the inner urban area, the beaches, and the outer area, and all of those probably within 20-minute drive of each other at the extreme. So when I say the outer areas, it's not really that outer. They're all there together, but there are three kind of distinct geographic areas. So now that we talked a little bit about kind of in general, what are the three different things you want to look at as and where to go, think about where to stay. And the big decision here is, do we want to stay in the city? Do we want to stay at the beach? Or do we want to stay in between? So I will say I have never stayed in the city itself, but there are a lot of really nice hotels, nice Airbnbs, bread and breakfast and things inside the city itself that I've heard are wonderful and that people really enjoy staying in. I have stayed on the beach, okay, and the beaches are really nice to stay on. There's a lot of houses. There's fewer hotels than a lot of other places, but there are some of those at Folly Beach and Isle of Palms that you can take advantage of. And there's Airbnbs and things. The third option is somewhere in between. So remember we talked about there was that outer area, the beaches, and the city. Okay, so kind of in surrounding the city and kind of between the city and the beaches are a couple towns that have some really nice places to stay in. And that I have found to be your best option if you're planning on going to the beaches and the city or the beaches in the outer area. Really, even if you want to go to the city, because number one, it's much cheaper to stay there than it is either at the beach or in the city. Number two, you really have no problem accessing either one of any of those three things. Okay. So we stayed at a town called Mount Pleasant, which was very nice. It had wonderful amenities. There were wonderful restaurants there. We used Airbnb and it was an excellent place. And it was really connected into the city. It was connected into the beaches and it was connected into that outer area. So we were able to, from there, basically travel to the plantations we want to go to. We were really only a few miles from Sullivan's Island Beach, a couple more miles to Isle of Palms. The farthest one away was Folly Beach, which took us 20 minutes to get to. And we were just one bridge away from the city. And that was just so nice to have a place that we could go to get away from everything, kind of a base of operations. And there were places like Shim Creek and that had a great restaurant district right there, all on its own without having to go to other places. And really, it's so easy to get around and stuff. I would definitely recommend that. Now, of course, if you're one of those people that really only wants to go to the beach and you want to be able to walk on the beach, that's not going to have that accommodation. And if you're not planning on leaving the beach, sure, maybe find a place that you can do that. Or alternatively, if you want to stay in the city and you're not going out of the city because you plan on maybe enjoying the nightlife or something, you don't want to drive, then you can stay in the city. But definitely, it's only a few minute drive from the city to Mount Pleasant or to some of the other surrounding communities. So think about that as an option. I was a little apprehensive about it, but it turned out to be great. So once you made your decision on where to go and where to stay, you have to think about how to get around. Okay. So Charleston and the surrounding areas are not necessarily built for driving, okay? There's a lot of really good connections and things, but in the city you have narrow roads and a lot of traffic. And then when you get out to the beaches, um, there's just a lot of people trying to get in there, okay? So I would not recommend planning on driving everywhere that you go, okay? I would not recommend on trying to like drive in the city from historic site to historic site or from attraction to attraction or going to the beach and say, well, I'm going to, you know, park here and go to the beach and then later I'm going to drive down to get lunch and I'm going to drive back. I wouldn't recommend that, okay? Because that can kind of be a pain. Instead, what I would recommend is finding a way to get some bikes. Either bring some bikes along with you. That's what we did. We travel with those. I have a bike rack that goes in my hitch. I did a review of that. So if you want to check out that video, that is on my channel. We took those along. You can also rent bikes down there. And I will say everything is incredibly flat. And it's so easy to get around. There's plenty of places to park your bikes. The beaches seemed incredibly safe. I had no problem with locking the bike up and just leaving it. And basically what we did was we would either go into the city or into the beaches, park, and then ride around on the bikes when we wanted to go somewhere. And everyone was very respectful of bikes. There are bikes everywhere down there. So I never felt unsafe about going out and about. So bikes are a great way to get around, and everything. While maybe you look at the map or something, you think, oh, you'll never be able to get from one place to the other on your bike. They're really close to each other. In fact, we probably would not have driven to the beaches, except for maybe to Folly Beach because it's a little farther, except for they were working on something and had the bike trail closed. So we did have to drive in to Sullivan's Island and Isle of Palms. And I'm not a big bike rider. So just admitting that, you can kind of get the sense that it is relatively easy to get around on your bikes. Now, in terms of parking, you're going to want to find either at the beaches or in the city a central place that you can just park and kind of locate as your base. All right. There are plenty of parking garages in Charleston, but they do fill up rather fast. So if you're going into the city, pick which one you want to go to. Get in there early, get a parking place, and don't try to move around because you may end up not having a parking spot. On the street parking did not really seem to be an option in the city. I mean, I guess you could figure it out, but it seemed to be really complicated to me. Finding a spot seemed to be difficult, so I would not recommend on the street parking. Utilize the parking garages. They weren't all that expensive to park for a day. They had amenities like restrooms and things that you could utilize. Now, if you go to the beaches, that's a different story. There is a parking area at Isle of Palms and at Folly Beach that's operated by the county. It's in a park. There is not one at Sullivan Island. However, all three of the places have off the street parking. The big thing there is you want to make sure you park all the way off the street. All right. You don't want to have any of your vehicle on the roadway or they will give you a ticket. We did not have an issue finding a place to park off of the street, even close to the central parts of those communities. However, I think probably if you went in the middle of summer, you might have a problem doing that because there may probably be a whole lot more people there. So you're going to want to think about that. But I think even during those time periods, you're just going to have to park a little bit farther out and then bike in or find some other way to get into the central part of the beach if you want to go to like downtown or something like that. But again, there is plenty of off the street parking. You just might have to drive around and look for it. And there's plenty of beach access points on all three of those islands that should make it relatively easy for you to get onto the beach from wherever you park. So that definitely will not be an issue for you. All right, and then the final thing is planning what to see. All right, so there are a lot of things to see in the Charleston area. And making your decision is going to be probably one of the toughest things because you're not going to be able to see them all. So you have to make tough decisions about what you want to look at. But there are three things that I want to recommend for you to consider when going down. And these are not specific places again, but three things to help you make your decision. So, number one, um, do you want to visit a place that requires paid admission, or you want to stick to the free stuff? And I'll say that there are plenty of free things to see in Charleston, at the beaches, and in that outer area. Okay. So, one of the great things is Historic Charleston. If you're into historic sites like I am, they have an app with information about hundreds of historic houses and other structures that you can visit and learn about while you're in the city without having to pay anything, okay? Without having to go inside, because a lot of them are private residences. So if you want to avoid the house tours, that's a great way to do it. But there's also all kinds of other historic things to see for free in the city. There's all types of art projects that you can visit. There's all types of free parks. There's all types of places you can go for scenery. Of course, it doesn't cost to go to the beaches. All three of those were wonderful and pristine. So if you're looking for free stuff, there's more than enough to do in a week, 2 weeks, probably even a month while visiting there. In terms of the places that you do pay to visit, there are a lot of great attractions that I think that are worth the money. There's museums, there's going to see the Hunley, there's going to plantations. The one thing is you're going to want to plan out which of those that you pay to see, because a lot of those you can get packages. All right, you can get a package to go to a certain number of historic houses in downtown Charleston that are owned by the same preservation group. And you can even bundle those with like some plantation tours or some other things. All right, so you want to plan those out in advance instead of trying to do those when you go down there. And if you do those when you go down there, you want to talk to them about that to see what opportunities there are, because you don't want to pay to go to one site that's owned by Historic Charleston and one site that's owned by the South Carolina Museum, because then you're paying two different admission costs when really there's several days worth of visitation that goes into one package that comes from one place. And I'll say that you want to look for flexibility when you're making those tours, because some of them have tours only at set times. So like 10:15, 11:15, 12:15. Some of them have just kind of come in as you want. Okay. So if you're like me and you don't know what you might get stopped to see on the way, like you don't want to be on a schedule when you're on vacation, I really enjoyed those ones that you could go to whenever you wanted. All right. And those actually, those admissions, when you buy those, they're good for more than one day. Okay. I think like the one we got was good for 2 days. So, we ran out of time to see all of the houses at one time. So we were able to go back the next day and finish up. And then the third thing about what to see is you have to plan again in advance. All right. So things like Fort Sumter, some of the plantations, those tours fill up super, super fast. So you want to get those reservations early if you're planning on going there. Okay. And you want to be able to say, this is the time we want to go, know when to go, and know how to get there and everything, because you definitely do not want to miss those tours that you've had to make reservations for, pay for, and that you might not be able to get later. Okay. So that goes for some of the plantations again, that goes for quite a few other things. And I will say that the visitor centers down there are excellent. So one, I guess, bonus tip is we found out that many of the visitor centers are staffed by the same people. So like, I don't know if they work for the same company, but I think they might have. We saw the same people at the Mount Pleasant Visitor Center that we later saw at the Charleston Visitor Center. So I tell you that to say, don't be afraid to ask questions about Charleston when you're in Mount Pleasant or anywhere, because they are going to have great information. All right. So when you go down there, if there are things you want to do that you really know about, and you maybe haven't done them in advance, go to the visitor center as soon as possible. and make your plans, and they will help you out, and they'll help be able to package all of that stuff together for you. So hopefully my 5 tips on general stuff to do in the Charleston area on kind of how to make your plans and make your trip better is helpful. Like I said, I'll try to follow it up with some really specific examples from our recent trips down there. And hope you have a great day. Enjoy traveling. Hit like to this video, comment with any questions you have. I'll try to answer them, and subscribe as the other ones come out. Have a good one.